So again, we're in the second week of the spiritual exercises. Last week we covered the first contemplation, which was the Annunciation. Now we move into the second contemplation, Ignatius calls it, which is on the Nativity. Ignatius, though, he gives an interesting twist to this imaginative, contemplative exercise. He says in the first point, quote, "I will make myself a poor, little, unworthy slave, and as though present, look upon the Holy Family, contemplate them, and serve them in their needs with all possible homage and reverence." End quote. So we put ourselves in the scene of the Nativity as a poor little slave boy or slave girl, contemplating Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, or the pregnant Mary, we should say, and serving them. So we see, Ignatius says, in your imagination, Mary and Joseph moving towards Bethlehem from Nazareth. We're all familiar with this Christmas story, if you will. We picture Mary on the donkey going over the hills of Judea, Joseph by her side. It's a peaceful family vacation. To me, that's somewhat of an anomaly. I don't know about you. When I was a child, family vacations, they were fun, but the travel part was not fun. And especially parents with young children, traveling is stressful. You got strollers, diapers, toys you got to work with. Getting through security is not easy at an airport. Or if the family's driving instead, it's inevitable that 5 minutes after the car departs the driveway, someone has forgotten something. The car needs to turn back around. It's a lot of stress, maybe some anger. Movie on the back seat of the van is noisy. The mother's thinking about what she might have forgotten. The father's worried about, is the trip going to be successful? Is the family going to enjoy itself? I call it the original sin of family vacations, traveling. It's a nightmare, right? Maybe when you get to the destination, it's relaxing, but certainly the travel part is not. But the Holy Family, of course, knew no sin, and so they didn't experience this. So in your imagination, instead of that angst of travel, imagine just pure peace, simplicity with Mary and Joseph. There's no bickering. There's no inner anxiety about clothes or the fear of the destination. Mary and Joseph are at deep peace. They travel days on end. Most of the times, I would think, in silence, traveling silently together. Again, Mary sitting on the donkey, Joseph walking alongside it. They're just comfortable in each other's presence. Have you ever sat with someone for an extended period of time without talking? There's a deep inner communication going on at the level of the heart. Mary and Joseph were comfortable with each other. They may have been interiorly praying as they're walking, communicating with God. Their minds are at rest. They're taking in the nature around them. Maybe Joseph especially is focusing on the ground in front of them so they don't trip or fall, focusing on the animal. But there's a deep trust and surrender in Mary and Joseph as they travel across the Judean countryside. They don't need to fill their hearts and their minds with noise, with worries, with objects of entertainment. I remember as a child, it's funny, these imaginative exercises make me go back to my childhood. As a child, how important it was to have something to do on the airplane. This was crucial. It was as important as packing the right amount of clothes, underwear and shirts and socks and whatnot, because the great fear was boredom on the airplane. And so, do you bring one book or two books, video games, deck of cards, maybe some music? There's this great fear that you're going to have nothing to do on the airplane. It's almost worse having nothing to do than the plane crashing itself. There was just this great preoccupation as a child, making sure your carry-on bag had enough things to busy yourself with. There's a dread of boredom. Now, as a child, I felt that, but maybe some of us do that too. We fear being bored. Do we fear not having something to do? Then we can turn to Mary and Joseph in this exercise here. As I got older, I no longer brought a bunch of things to do on the airplane. I just would have one book to read. But even now, a few years into priesthood, other than the breviary that I bring, I don't even worry about bringing a book. In fact, I don't bring anything on the plane. I just sit there and pray. I just sit in silence and rest. It's the same with packing. Now, I know I'm a priest. I don't have a lot of things. I don't have a family to worry about when I'm traveling. But I can pretty much fit everything in a simple, small drawstring bag when I travel. It's funny, that bag carries all my possessions is smaller than the bag I used to carry as a kid with all these toys and whatnot for the airplane. I can fit, other than the clerics usually that I'm wearing, everything I have is in that simple bag. I think I've appropriated Jesus' admonition to the disciples from Matthew 10, 9 through 10. Take no gold, silver, or copper in your belts, no bag for your journey, no second tunic, no sandals, no walking stick. I guess that was good advice for TSA security line Jesus gave. But when I travel, I notice I have freedom. I have ease. There's peace when I travel because I don't worry about all this stuff. I'm not scrambling to get my laptop out of the bag. I'm not worrying if my check bag's going to end up in Tijuana or something. Am I going to be forced to wear an ugly shirt? I love San Francisco or something that I bought at the... No, I don't care. I don't need all that stuff. How about you? Yes, we're not children, but do you stress over, and not just with traveling, but in general, your items, your accessories? Will that laptop really bring you that much comfort, that much extra productivity? Do you need to be that productive? Can you not just be with God? Why can't we do that? Why can't we just go with God the way Mary and Joseph did as they're going to Bethlehem? Mary and Joseph went with God, literally went with God, Jesus, God, in the mother's womb. As you pray, just taste that or imagine that serenity and ease that this simple, poor peasant young man and woman had. Mary and Joseph didn't have many possessions, but even if they did, I imagine they wouldn't have brought them. They wouldn't have felt pressure to jam everything in a big duffel bag. They would have just been content being with themselves. Jesus says, Matthew 6, therefore do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the Gentiles seek all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them all. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be yours as well. Therefore do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Let the day's own trouble be sufficient for the day. They say that monks and nuns live longer than the normal average folk. Might it be because monks and nuns have so few possessions, they're not worried about what they are to drink or what they are to wear? Might it be because these men and women spend the majority of their life in prayer, in communion with God, that they've sought first the kingdom? Maybe those Old Testament figures that supposedly lived to extreme old ages actually did indeed live that old. They say Abraham was 175 when he died. Moses was 120. Noah supposedly was 950. Okay, that might be a stretch, but they lived simply. They lived purely with God, and their lives extended. Here we are in the year 2020. We have all the possessions of the world, all the medicines, all the health advantages, and we still don't live past 80 or 90. Psalm 90:10. Our days may come to 70 years or 80 if our strength endures, yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. It's the psalmist. Speaking of flying away and living to an old age, there's a very mysterious figure. He only gets a couple of verses in the book of Genesis in the Old Testament. His name is Enoch. Enoch supposedly lived to 365, so not quite 950 like Noah, but still pretty good, 365. If you know the line about Enoch, it's Genesis chapter 5, verse 24. Quote, Then Enoch walked with God, and he was no longer here, for God took him. End quote. That's all we get from Enoch. And also that he had a son named Methuselah, who actually is considered the oldest person who ever walked the face of the earth. Methuselah lived to 965, supposedly. Enoch's son. So maybe the son learned from the father here. But Enoch, a simple, prayerful man, a contemplative, is just walking with God in the countryside, and he just disappears. He vanishes into God. He was so in tune with God. He was absorbed into him, literally. He's like Elijah, who was taken up to heaven without the fiery chariot. We can be sons and daughters of Enoch. Mary and Joseph walked with God like Enoch did, though they didn't vanish. They vanished maybe interiorly. But there they are, the Holy Family, silently loving, silently walking, silently being. There's peace, there's beauty amongst them. And you think about it, Mary and Joseph had every reason in the world to be stressed, to be anxious, angry, fearful, to experience any other heavy emotion you could think of, anything negative. Mary, of course, is very pregnant. They're in a dangerous place. The countryside outside of a caravan was almost asking to be attacked by roadside bandits. Joseph is leaving his work. He's leaving his home. They're going to a foreign place, Bethlehem. How's Joseph going to provide for this family? On top of that, they have the perplexing message from Gabriel about the son of David, the Messiah in the womb. All these reasons to be anxious, and they're not. They're calm. And it's not like Mary and Joseph suppressed their fear and said serenity now and sanity later. No, they just had a deep surrender to God that permeated their entire being, and this came from their prayerfulness. You know, Mary and Joseph, they were contemplatives. They gave themselves over to God, not just on this moment of the voyage to Bethlehem, but throughout their entire lives. And so it's just natural for them to be deeply calm when they're traveling. Mary was not deeply troubled. But she was, though, deeply troubled in another scene, if you remember that. Luke says specifically Mary was deeply troubled. This is at the Annunciation. We talked about that last week. Luke 1:29. Mary was greatly, deeply troubled at the saying of the angel and considered in her mind what sort of greeting this might be. You remember this, right? This is when Gabriel appears to Mary and says, "Hail, favored one, the Lord is with you." And then Mary is troubled at this greeting. So why? It's actually kind of interesting. In my opinion, Mary's troubled because of this greeting. Now, the greeting, "Hail, favored one," didn't get said, wasn't a common greeting. So when the angel Gabriel says that, it's a big deal. "Hail, favored one, the Lord is with you." We say that in the Hail Mary, of course, right? But Mary already knew that she was with God, that she was favored. So the fact that the angel has to say this to her troubles her. So it's like when you get called into the boss's office or the principal's office or the pastor's office, and the subordinate gets called into the office and is paid a bunch of compliments to start with. You know the hammer's going to fall. Okay, Harvard Business Review says for every one negative comment, you have to give 5 positive comments. So when you get 5 positive comments, you know, okay, there's a negative comment coming. And that's the whole point, right? So when we do fraternal correction in my little priestly group, when they say, you know, "James, you're a great guy, you're doing an awesome job," I'm like, all right, I know something's coming here. I've done something wrong. I didn't unload the dishwasher or something. Right? So it's like when the angel Gabriel pays this positive compliment to Mary, "Hail, favored one," she might be thinking, if she has a melancholic temperament, partially melancholic temperament like I do, that, whoa, there must be a negative comment coming here. Maybe that's why she's disturbed. That's my opinion. There's a forthcoming criticism that's implied in the Hail Favored One. But of course, that doesn't happen, right? The angel is not going to criticize Mary. She's full of grace. She has no sin within her. So anyways, that's to me why Mary was deeply troubled. But I'm going to continue on that theme here for a second. We talked about, remember last week with the Annunciation, the various pieces of art that depict this scene. And the classic traditional ones, the Fra Angelico and Da Vinci and Michelangelo and Caravaggio depictions of it, show Mary very simple. She's like a doll just receiving the angel's message. One of my favorite ones, though, is Sandro Botticelli's depiction of the Annunciation. It's in the Uffizi Museum in Florence. He painted it in 1489. Look it up if you get a chance. Botticelli's Annunciation. Mary's actually standing, and the angel is kneeling before her. Mary is stunningly beautiful. In fact, she's more beautiful than Botticelli's more famous piece of art, which is The Birth of Venus. The scene to me is interesting because it's after, in my mind, this initial greeting when Mary has been disturbed. So the angel is almost apologizing in my imagination for having disturbed Mary. That's why he's genuflecting before her. Mary is, after she has her initial greeting, is basically saying, "It's okay, I understand, Angel Gabriel. You don't need to apologize." What does Gabriel say? "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found great favor with God." Mary doesn't need Gabriel to apologize, if you're still following my weird imagination here. Mary doesn't need an explanation for why she's favored, full of grace. She's not worried. She's not anxious by this, really, because her trust in God is so deep. Mary is so confident that God loves her and that God has called her, that she doesn't need assurance. She doesn't need someone to tell her that she's favored, because she has appropriated this truth in the depths of her being. And so in this Botticelli painting, Mary's the one in authority here as the angel Gabriel genuflects before her. The author, Edward Sri, he makes this interesting point about the Annunciation. He says, the Bible tells us that Mary, quote, considered in her mind what sort of greeting this might be, end quote. That word considered in the biblical Greek, dialogizeto, is the word from which dialogue in English is derived. The term describes an intense, extended reflection. Therefore, even though Mary is greatly troubled by the angel's greeting, even though she experiences some fear and trembling, knowing that God may be asking her to do something difficult, she remains in dialogue with God. End quote. That's Edward Sri. So when Mary considers in her mind, what Sri is saying is to consider means to be in dialogue with God. So Mary is at peace, not because she's not criticized by Gabriel, but because she maintains this inner dialogue with God in her heart. This dialogue will run throughout the course of Mary's life, and especially during the Nativity and the voyage to Bethlehem. She's in inner dialogue with God. She's considering God. She's maintaining a spiritual life. That's how she's able to remain calm. That's how we can remain calm, by maintaining that open communication with God in our hearts. And to me, this is a lesson Jesus learned from his mother's womb about how to walk, how to travel peacefully with God, how to not let the stresses of society and the world cause uneasiness or disturbance in his soul. You know, Jesus walked up and down these same paths of Judea, of Israel, and I doubt Jesus was ever stressed when he traveled, because he likewise had that inner dialogue with the Father. He was surrendered to God. So this is more than just a technique about how to be centered amidst chaos. Jesus was fundamentally at peace throughout his stressful life. Why? Because he was the fruit of the love of Mary and Joseph for one another and for God. He was the fruit of the love of Mary and Joseph for one another and for God. The preacher of the papal household, his name is Raniero Cantalamessa. He's got a book called Contemplating the Trinity. And he says in this book, it's very profound, that a child needs and wants to be loved by his parents as the love overflowing from their spousal love. So a child secretly wants the mother and the father, the husband and wife, to love each other first, and then the spousal love overflows into the child. That's what the child wants. When a marriage fails, or the husband and wife don't really love each other, and instead they love the child individually or separately, this causes torment or a deep wound in the child. The child doesn't want to be loved separately by the mother and father. He wants to be loved, again, as the fruit of their communion. He's at peace. It's like he's basking in the glow of his parents' love from which he was brought forth. Jesus is basking in the love of Mary and Joseph, both for each other and for God. And that's why he's a deeply peaceful, secure boy and then man. So as you pray with Mary and Joseph traveling, as you see their love for each other, their deep peace and contentment, allow your heart to in turn be calmed and filled with that same love, the same presence of God. As you realize that God is all you need, not your toys and your books and clothes and all that stuff that you put in your carry-on, God is all you need. Feel your attachments to those things just melt away as you walk as the slave boy or girl with Mary and Joseph to Bethlehem. Your self-image, your ego, all that melts away. Your heart's desire for God is articulated and simultaneously fulfilled. That's the beauty of Mary and Joseph. That's the beauty of contemplating the Nativity. Amen.